The rain hammered Chicago's south side like bullets against concrete, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces before vanishing into the darkness. Lightning split the sky in jagged white lines, illuminating the empty streets for brief, terrifying moments before plunging everything back into shadow. The storm had arrived without warning, transforming the city into a maze of flooded gutters and abandoned storefronts where even the bravest souls had retreated behind locked doors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Kaisha Washington pressed her back against the brick wall of an abandoned warehouse, her worn jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. The cardboard beneath her feet had long since turned to mush, but she stayed put, watching the rain pour down, in sheets so thick she could barely make out the streetlight 20 feet away. Her shopping cart sat beside her, covered with a tattered plastic tarp that did little to protect the few belongings she called her own. A sleeping bag, rolled tight. A backpack with a broken zipper. 3 books she'd rescued from a dumpster. Behind the library. A thermos that still held warmth from the coffee shop, that sometimes let her sit inside when the manager wasn't looking. She was 42 years old, though the streets had aged her beyond her years. Her skin was dark brown, weathered by sun and wind, marked by the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, covered by a knit cap that had seen better decades. She wore 3 layers of shirts beneath. A jacket that had once been navy blue, but now showed every stain, every tear, every night spent sleeping rough. Her boots were too big, held together with duct tape and determination. Her eyes, though tired, remained alert, sharp, the kind of eyes that had learned to read danger in shadows, kindness in strangers' faces, opportunity in the smallest gestures. Kaisha had been homeless for 8 months now. Not by choice, never by choice, but by the cruel mathematics of a life that had counted every penny and still come up short. She'd worked 2 jobs until the factory closed. Lived in the same apartment for 6 years until the landlord decided he could get more money from someone else. Applied for assistance until the paperwork became a maze she couldn't navigate without help that never came. The streets had claimed her slowly, one setback at a time, until the warehouse wall became her shelter and the shopping cart became her home. But Kaisha Washington was not broken. Bent, maybe, worn thin by circumstances beyond her control. But not broken. She'd learned to find small mercies in hard places, the way morning sunlight could warm a bench just right. The kindness of strangers who dropped coins without judgment. The satisfaction of sharing food with someone hungrier than herself. She'd discovered that dignity wasn't something you could lose just because you didn't have an address. It was something you carried inside, protected like a flame in a storm. Thunder rolled overhead, so loud it made her chest vibrate. She checked her phone, a cracked device she kept charged at the public library. 11:47 p.m. The storm was supposed to pass by midnight, according to the weather app, but it showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. The wind howled between buildings, sending trash cans tumbling down the street. Like metal drums. A stop sign swayed back and forth, its post creaking in protest. Kaisha pulled her knees closer to her chest, trying to conserve body heat. She'd ridden out storms before, but this one felt different, angrier, more determined. To remind everyone who was really in charge. The warehouse behind her provided some protection from the wind, but the rain still found ways to reach her, trickling down the wall and pooling around her feet. She'd been wet before. She'd be wet again. The important thing was to stay safe. Stay alert and wait for it to pass. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm, high-pitched, desperate, human. She lifted her head, straining to listen over the crash of thunder and the constant drumming of rain against asphalt. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it. The mind played tricks when you spent too many nights alone with only the weather for company. But there it was again, crying, definitely crying. A child's voice, thin and frightened, cutting through. The storm like a knife through cloth. Kaisha stood up slowly, her joints protesting after hours of sitting in the same position. She peered into the darkness, trying to locate the source of the sound. The rain made everything blurry, distorted, like looking through water. Lightning flashed again, and for just a second, she saw something that made her heart stop. A small figure huddled against a chain-link fence about 50 yards away. Too small to be an adult, too alone to be safe. The figure was moving, rocking back and forth, and even from this distance, Kaisha could tell it was a child. A little girl, soaked to the bone, with nowhere to go and no one to help her. Kaisha's first instinct was to look around for adults, parents, guardians, someone who should be taking care of this child. But the streets were empty. Every window was dark. Every door was closed. The storm had driven everyone inside, everyone except the people who had no inside to go to. And now, apparently, one lost little girl who shouldn't be out here anymore. Then Kaisha should. She grabbed her backpack and left the shopping cart behind. The cart would only slow her down, and she could come back for it later if it was still there. Right now, there was something more important than protecting her few possessions. She pulled the hood of her jacket up and stepped into the storm. The rain hit her like a wall. Within seconds, she was soaked through, water running down her face and into her eyes. The wind pushed against her with surprising force, making each step a small battle. She kept her head down and moved toward the fence, following the sound of crying that somehow managed to reach her even over the chaos of the storm. As she got closer, she could see the child more clearly. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with long dark hair plastered to her head and shoulders. She wore what had probably been a pretty yellow dress earlier in the day, but now it was muddy and torn, clinging to her small frame. Her shoes were missing. Her feet were bare, pale against the dark asphalt. She sat with her back against the fence, arms wrapped around her knees, sobbing with the kind of complete despair that only children could feel. Kaisha approached carefully. She'd learned that frightened people, especially frightened children, could react unpredictably when strangers appeared in the dark. She stopped about 10 feet away and called out, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Hey there, sweetheart, you okay?" The little girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were wide with fear, reflecting the occasional flash of lightning. Tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. She didn't answer, just stared at Kaisha like she was trying to decide whether this new person represented safety or danger. Kaisha crouched down, making herself smaller, less threatening. She kept her voice gentle, the way she'd spoken to her nephew before life had taken him away from her too. "I'm not gonna hurt you, baby. My name's Kaisha. What's yours?" The girl's mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, so quietly Kaisha almost missed it. "Emma." "Emma, that's a pretty name." Kaisha scooted a little closer, still keeping her distance. "Emma, honey, where are your parents? Where's your family?" Emma's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't know," she whispered. "I can't find them. I was with Daddy at his office, and then there were all these people, and someone said there was danger, and everyone was running, and I got lost. And now I can't find anyone, and I'm scared, and I want to go home." The words tumbled out in a rush, broken by sobs and hiccups. Kaisha felt her heart clench. Whatever had happened, wherever this child had come from, she was alone in a storm that could kill her. The temperature was dropping. Hypothermia was a real danger, especially for someone so small and wet. "Okay, Emma, listen to me, sweetheart. You're gonna be okay. I'm gonna help you." Kaisha pulled off her jacket, revealing the 3 shirts beneath. The top shirt was flannel, worn but clean. She pulled it off and held it out to Emma. Put this on over your dress. It's gonna be too big, but it'll help keep you warm. Emma hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took the shirt. Her fingers were blue with cold, shaking so hard she could barely grip the fabric. Kaisha helped her put it on, pulling the sleeves down over her hands and buttoning it up to her chin. The shirt hung down to her knees like a dress, but it was dry and warm from Kaisha's body heat. There we go, that's better. Kaisha put her jacket back on, immediately feeling the chill, but pushing it aside. She'd been cold before. The important thing was getting this child somewhere safe. Emma, we need to get out of this rain. Can you walk? Emma nodded, though her legs shook when she tried to stand. Kaisha reached out and took her hand, feeling how small and cold it was in her own weathered palm. Together, they made their way back toward the warehouse, moving slowly through the storm. Lightning continued to flash overhead, and thunder rolled across the sky like an approaching army. When they reached the relative shelter of the warehouse wall, Kaisha guided Emma to sit down on her sleeping bag, which was still mostly dry beneath the overhang. She pulled out her thermos and unscrewed the cap, releasing a small curl of steam into the cold air. This is coffee, but it's warm. Just take little sips, okay? It'll help. Emma wrapped her tiny hands around the thermos and brought it to her lips. She made a face at the bitter taste but kept drinking, and Kaisha could see some color returning to her cheeks. The flannel shirt had stopped her shivering, though her feet were still bare and obviously cold. Kaisha looked down at her own boots. Too big for Emma's feet, but better than nothing. She unlaced them and pulled them off, then gently helped Emma put them on. The child's feet disappeared entirely into the boots, but Kaisha tightened the laces as much as she could and stuffed the toes with a spare sock from her backpack. How's that feel, baby? Warm, Emma said quietly. It was the first time her voice hadn't shaken since Kaisha had found her. They sat together in the semi-darkness, sharing the coffee and listening to the storm rage around them. Kaisha studied the child's face in the dim light from the distant street lamp. Despite the dirt and tears, she could see that Emma was well cared for. Her hair had been professionally cut. Her nails were clean and trimmed. The yellow dress, even muddy and torn as it was, looked expensive. This wasn't a child from the streets. This was someone's precious daughter, probably someone with enough money to buy fancy dresses and regular haircuts, and all the things Kaisha couldn't afford. Emma, can you tell me about your daddy? What kind of work does he do? Emma's eyes lit up slightly. He has a big building downtown with his name on it. He helps people with their money, and he has meetings all the time, and sometimes he takes me to work with him when I don't have school. She paused, then added proudly, he's really important. Everyone knows who he is. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Kaisha nodded, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. A big building downtown. Someone important enough that everyone knew who he was. That narrowed it down to a handful of possibilities in Chicago's financial district. But right now, the important thing wasn't figuring out who Emma's father was. It was keeping her safe until they could get her back to him. Do you remember the name of the building or the address? Emma shook her head. I just know it's really tall and has lots of windows, and Daddy's office is on the top floor with a view of the lake. That described half the skyscrapers in downtown Chicago, but it was something. Kaisha made a mental note to call the police in the morning, once the storm passed and the phones were working again. For now, they needed to focus on getting through the night. The wind was picking up again, howling through the narrow alley between buildings. Kaisha pulled her sleeping bag around both of them, creating a small cocoon of warmth. Emma leaned against her shoulder, still clutching the thermos, her breathing finally starting to slow and steady. Kaisha? Emma's voice was small in the darkness. Yeah. Baby? Are you gonna leave me? The question hit Keisha like a physical blow. She looked down at this child who'd been abandoned by circumstances, left alone in a storm with no one to protect her except a homeless woman who barely had enough resources to protect herself. Emma's eyes were wide with fear, but also with something else: hope, trust, the kind of faith that children gave so freely and adults had to earn. "No, sweetheart, I'm not gonna leave you. We're gonna stick together until we find your daddy, okay? I promise." Emma nodded and closed her eyes, finally relaxing for the first time since Keisha had found her. The storm continued to rage overhead. But beneath the overhang of the abandoned warehouse, two unlikely companions had found each other. One who had lost everything but her compassion. One who had everything but was temporarily lost. Both of them holding onto each other as the world outside tried its best to tear them apart. Keisha stayed awake, watching over Emma as she slept, protecting her from the storm and from whatever other dangers the night might bring. She didn't know yet that the child in her arms was Emma Catherine Sterling, daughter of James Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial Group, one of the most powerful men in Chicago. She didn't know that by morning her picture would be on every news channel in the city. She didn't know that this single act of compassion would change both their lives forever. All she knew was that a child needed help, and she was going to provide it, no matter what it cost her. Because that's what you did when you saw someone more vulnerable than yourself. You stepped up. You showed up. You protected them, even when you couldn't protect yourself. The storm raged on, but inside the small shelter they'd created together, there was warmth. There was safety. And there was the beginning of something neither of them expected. A connection that would prove stronger than any storm. Dawn crept across Chicago like a hesitant visitor, casting pale gray light through the dissipating clouds. The storm had finally exhausted itself sometime around 4 in the morning, leaving behind a city transformed. Streets glistened with standing water that reflected the early light like broken mirrors. Debris littered the sidewalks, fallen branches, scattered newspapers. A child's bicycle that had been picked up and deposited 3 blocks from where it belonged. The air smelled clean but heavy, like the earth after a long drought. Keisha stirred. First, her internal clock tuned to survival rather than comfort. She'd slept fitfully, waking every hour to check on Emma and listen for approaching footsteps or voices. The child was still curled against her side, breathing steadily, one small hand clutching the sleeve of Keisha's jacket. In sleep, Emma looked even younger than her 7 years, her face peaceful in a way that made Keisha's chest tighten with protective instinct. The morning brought new challenges. Emma would need food, proper clothing, and most importantly, she needed to be reunited with her family. But Keisha also knew that approaching the authorities wasn't simple when you lived on the streets. Questions would be asked. Assumptions would be made. The fact that a homeless black woman had spent the night with a wealthy white child would raise eyebrows. Maybe worse. Emma's eyes fluttered open as the first rays of direct sunlight found their way into their makeshift shelter. She blinked several times, confusion crossing her face before memory returned. Her body tensed, and for a moment, Keisha thought she might start crying again. Instead, Emma sat up slowly and looked around at their surroundings with the curiosity that children possessed even in difficult circumstances. "I'm hungry," Emma said simply, her voice hoarse from the previous night's tears. Keisha reached into her backpack and pulled out a granola bar, one of 3 she'd been saving for emergencies. This definitely qualified. She unwrapped it carefully and broke it in half, giving the larger piece to Emma while keeping the smaller portion for herself. "This should help until we can get you back to your daddy," Keisha said, watching as Emma ate with the focused intensity of genuine hunger. "Do you remember anything else about where you were before you got lost? Maybe what street the building was on?" Emma chewed thoughtfully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There were lots of cars," she said finally, "and people in suits walking really fast. and there was a big fountain with a statue of a man on a horse. Her face brightened slightly. Oh, and I remember seeing the lake from Daddy's window. It was really blue yesterday before the storm came. The fountain narrowed things down considerably. Emma was describing Federal Plaza, which met her father's. Building was somewhere in the Loop, Chicago's central business district. That area housed dozens of major corporations, law firms, and financial institutions. Without more specific information, finding the right building would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Kaisha stood and stretched, working out the kinks from sleeping on concrete. Her body protested every movement, reminding her that 42 wasn't old until you'd been living rough for 8 months. She helped Emma to her feet and quickly packed their few belongings into her backpack. Come on, sweetheart. Let's head toward downtown and see if we can figure out where you belong. They made an unlikely pair walking through the awakening city. Kaisha pushed her shopping cart with one hand while Emma walked beside her, still wearing the oversized flannel shirt and boots that made her feet look enormous. The yellow dress beneath was stained and wrinkled, but in the morning light, Kaisha could see the quality of the fabric, the careful stitching that spoke of expensive taste. And unlimited budgets. The streets grew busier as they moved closer to the city center. Early commuters emerged from coffee shops, clutching steaming cups and checking their phones. Construction workers gathered at job sites, their voices carrying across the humid air. Business owners swept water and debris from their storefronts, assessing damage from the storm. Most people barely glanced at Kaisha, and her cart. The homeless had become as invisible as the streetlights to most city dwellers. But Emma drew attention. A well-dressed child walking with a homeless woman raised questions, and Kaisha could feel eyes following them. A businessman in expensive suit stared openly as they passed. A woman loading groceries into her car stopped what she was doing to watch them with concern. Kaisha knew they needed to get Emma home quickly. Before someone called the police with suspicions rather than help, they stopped at a public library that was just opening for the day. Kaisha had a good relationship with some of the librarians, who'd always treated her with dignity and allowed her to use their computers and charge her phone. She approached the information desk where a familiar face greeted her. "Morning, Kaisha," said Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 60s who'd been working at this branch for over 20 years. Her eyes immediately went to Emma, widening with surprise. "Who's your friend?" "This is Emma," Kaisha said carefully. "She got separated from her family during the storm last night. I found her, and now I'm trying to help her get home." Mrs. Rodriguez came around from behind the desk and knelt down to Emma's level. "Hello, Emma. That must have been very scary for you." Her voice was gentle, professional, the tone of someone who'd dealt with many frightened children over the years. "Can you tell me your full name?" "Emma Catherine Sterling," the child replied clearly. "My daddy is James Sterling, and he works in a big building downtown with his name on it." Mrs. Rodriguez's expression changed immediately. She stood up quickly and grabbed Kaisha's arm. "Sterling Financial," she whispered urgently. "James Sterling." "Good Lord, Kaisha, do you know who this child is?" Before Kaisha could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez was already moving toward the computer terminals. She pulled up a web browser and typed rapidly. Within seconds, the screen filled with search results. The top headline made Kaisha's blood run cold. Massive. "Manhunt underway for missing CEO's daughter, Emma Sterling, 7. Vanished during downtown emergency evacuation, $500,000. Reward offered for safe return, Mrs." Rodriguez clicked on the first article, and Emma's school photo appeared on the screen. The same dark hair, the same bright eyes, but in the picture she was smiling, wearing what looked like a private school uniform. The article detailed how Emma had been visiting her father's office during a security emergency when a fire alarm triggered an evacuation. In the chaos, she'd become separated from her father and the security team assigned to protect her. James Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial Group, one of the largest investment firms in the Midwest, Mrs. Rodriguez read aloud. Net worth estimated at $2.3 billion. The FBI has been called in to assist with the search. Kaisha felt her knees go weak. She'd spent the night protecting one of the most sought-after children in America, the daughter of a billionaire, the kind of person who lived in a world so far removed from hers that they might as well have been from different planets. Emma peered at the computer screen with interest. "That's me," she said brightly, pointing at her photo. "And that's Daddy's building." She indicated a glass tower in the background of one of the pictures, a gleaming monument to wealth and power that stretched toward the sky like a crystal spear. "Sweetheart," Keisha said, her voice carefully controlled, "why didn't you tell me your daddy was famous?" Emma looked confused by the question. "I don't know, you didn't ask. Besides, he's just Daddy to me. He makes me pancakes on Sunday mornings and reads me stories about princesses." She paused, then added matter-of-factly, "He also has lots of meetings, and people always want to talk to him about money stuff, but that's boring." Mrs. Rodriguez was already reaching for the phone. "I need to call the police immediately. They've been searching all night." "Wait," Kaisha said, her mind racing. She understood the urgency, but she also knew how these situations played out. The moment the authorities arrived, Emma would be whisked away to safety, and Kaisha would be left to answer uncomfortable questions about why a homeless woman had a billionaire's daughter in her possession. "Let me think for a second." But Emma was already tugging on Kaisha's sleeve. "Can we go see Daddy now? I want to tell him about the storm and how you saved me and gave me your shirt to keep warm." The innocence in Emma's voice cut through Kaisha's worry. This wasn't about her own fears or the potential consequences. This was about a child who wanted to go home to her father. A father who'd probably spent the worst night of his life, thinking his daughter was dead. "Yes, baby," Kaisha said firmly. "Let's go find your daddy." Mrs. Rodriguez finished dialing and spoke quickly into the phone. "This is Maria Rodriguez at the Woodlawn Library. I have Emma Sterling here. She's safe." A pause. "Yes, the Emma Sterling. She's with the woman who found her. We'll be here." She hung up and turned to them. "They're sending a car immediately. And Emma's father is on his way too." Within minutes, Kaisha could hear sirens approaching. Through the library's front windows, she watched as police cars, unmarked sedans, and a black SUV with tinted windows converged on the building. Men in suits spoke rapidly into radios while uniformed officers secured the perimeter. It looked like a scene from a movie, all of it focused on the little girl who was currently examining a picture book about dinosaurs. The library's front door burst open, and James Sterling entered like a force of nature. He was tall, probably in his mid-40s, with silver-touched hair and intense blue eyes that swept the room until they found what they were looking for. He wore an expensive gray suit that somehow looked both perfectly tailored and rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. His face was haggard with exhaustion and worry, but the moment he saw Emma, his entire expression transformed. "Daddy!" Emma dropped the book and ran toward him, her oversized boots making awkward slapping sounds on the library floor. James Sterling dropped to his knees and caught his daughter in his arms, holding her so tightly that Kaisha worried he might hurt her. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Emma, oh God, Emma, I was so scared. He pulled back to look at her face, his hands gently touching her cheeks, her hair, as if confirming she was real. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Daddy. Kaisha took care of me. She gave me her shirt and her boots and shared her coffee, even though it tasted yucky, and she promised she wouldn't leave me alone." For the first time since entering the library, James Sterling looked around the room until his eyes found Kaisha. She stood near the computer terminals, suddenly very aware of her appearance, the worn clothing, the weathered hands, the fact that she probably smelled like rain and concrete and too many nights sleeping rough. Their eyes met across the room, and Keisha saw something she hadn't expected. Not suspicion or judgment or the careful politeness that wealthy people often used when forced to interact with the poor. What she saw was raw, overwhelming gratitude. The look of a parent whose worst nightmare had been prevented by a stranger's kindness. James Sterling stood slowly, still holding Emma's hand, and walked toward her. Behind him, FBI agents and police officers filled the library, but he seemed oblivious to everything except the woman who'd protected his daughter. "You're Keisha," he said simply. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Emma tells me you found her in the storm. That you kept her safe all night." Keisha nodded, unsure what to say. The magnitude of the situation was beginning to sink in. The manhunt, the FBI, the reward money that was more than she'd earned in her entire life. All of it because she'd done what any decent person would do: help a child in need. "I just couldn't leave her out there," Keisha said finally. She was scared and cold, and it was a bad storm. Anyone would have done the same thing. James Sterling's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "No," he said quietly. "Not anyone. Most people would have called the police and kept walking. You stopped, you stayed with her, you protected her." He paused, struggling with emotion. "You saved my daughter's life." Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, Keisha doesn't have a house. She sleeps outside. Can she come live with us?" The question hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds that rarely intersected. Keisha felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed by the child's innocent observation about her circumstances. But James Sterling didn't look uncomfortable or awkward. He looked thoughtful. "We'll figure something out," he said, still looking at Keisha. "I promise you that." As FBI agents began their questioning and photographers documented the reunion, Keisha realized that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The storm had brought more than rain and wind. It had brought her face to face with a little girl who needed help. And in helping her, Keisha had unknowingly stepped into a story much larger than either of them had imagined. The FBI field office buzzed with controlled chaos as agents coordinated the aftermath of Emma Sterling's safe return. Phones rang constantly, computer keyboards clicked in rapid succession, and serious-faced men and women in dark suits moved through the corridors with purposeful efficiency. The case had officially become a success story, but the investigation was far from over. They needed to understand exactly how a 7-year-old girl had vanished from a secured building during an emergency evacuation. And more importantly, how to prevent it from happening again. Keisha sat in a comfortable chair in Agent Patricia Chun's office, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that was better than anything she'd tasted in months. The room was professional, but not sterile. Family photos on the desk, a small plant by the window, certificates and commendations arranged neatly on one wall. Agent Chun herself was younger than Keisha had expected, maybe mid-30s, with intelligent dark eyes and a manner that suggested competence without intimidation. "I want to be clear from the start," Agent Chun said, settling into her chair behind the desk. "You're not in any trouble, Ms. Washington. We just need to understand the timeline of events for our report." Keisha nodded, though tension still coiled in her shoulders. She'd dealt with law enforcement before, usually when being moved along from public spaces or questioned about activities in areas where homeless people weren't welcome. Those interactions had taught her to be careful, to answer questions directly but not volunteer information that might be misinterpreted. "Can you walk me through how you found Emma?" Agent Chun's pen was poised over a legal pad, ready to record every detail. Keisha recounted the previous night's events methodically. The storm, the sound of crying, finding Emma by the fence, bringing her to shelter, staying awake to watch over her. Agent Chun took notes but didn't interrupt, occasionally nodding to encourage Keisha to continue. Did Emma tell you her last name when you first found her? Just her first name. She was pretty shaken up, and I didn't want to push her with too many questions right away. Kids get scared when adults they don't know start interrogating them. That was smart, Agent Chun said, making another note. When? Did you realize who she was? Not until this morning at the library. Mrs. Rodriguez looked her up on the computer when Emma mentioned her father's name. That's when we saw the news stories and called you. Agent Chun set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Ms. Washington, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've seen missing children cases that ended in tragedy, and I've seen others where luck and good timing made the difference. But what you did last night, that wasn't luck. That was a choice. Kaisa shifted uncomfortably. I just did what anybody would do. No, Agent Chun said firmly. That's where you're wrong. We've interviewed 14 people who were on that street or nearby streets during the storm. Security footage from a gas station 3 blocks away shows at least 6 vehicles that passed within sight of where Emma was sitting. Not one of them stopped. You were the only person who turned around and went back. The weight of that information settled over Kaisha like a heavy blanket. She'd saved Emma's life not just from the storm, but from a world full of people who'd chosen to keep driving. The realization was both humbling and disturbing. What happens now? Kaisha asked before Agent Chun could answer. There was a knock on the office door. A younger agent stuck his head in. Ma'am, Mr. Sterling is here. He's asking to speak with Ms. Washington. Agent Chun glanced at Kaisha. Are you comfortable with that? Kaisha nodded, though her stomach tightened with nervousness. James Sterling in the library had been a grateful father reunited with his daughter. James Sterling in an FBI office might be something entirely different, a powerful man with questions and expectations she couldn't anticipate. He entered the office still wearing the same rumpled suit from the morning, but his demeanor had changed. The desperate edge of panic was gone, replaced by something calmer but more intense. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of important people. Agent Chun, thank you for facilitating this. He turned to Kaisha and extended his hand. Ms. Washington, I hope you don't mind the interruption. I wanted to speak with you before the media circus gets out of control. Kaisha shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested he hadn't always worked behind a desk. How's Emma doing? She's at the hospital getting checked out, though she keeps telling the doctors she's fine and asking when she can see you again. James Sterling's expression softened slightly. She's quite taken with you. She's been telling everyone who'll listen about how brave you were. He set his briefcase on Agent Chun's desk and opened it, pulling out a manila folder. I've had my legal team working on something since this morning. I hope you'll consider it. Kaisha felt Agent Chun's attention sharpen. Whatever was in that folder, it was significant enough to bring one of Chicago's most powerful businessmen to an FBI office in person. First, James Sterling said, pulling out a document, there's the matter of the reward. $500,000 as advertised. No questions asked, no conditions attached. He placed a cashier's check on the desk in front of Kaisha. She stared at the numbers, her mind struggling to process them. $500,000. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. More money than her parents had ever seen. More money than most people ever saw. Enough to change everything, Mr. Sterling, she began, but he held up a hand. Please let me finish. The reward is just the beginning. He pulled out another document. I've also had my people look into your background. I hope you don't mind, but I needed to understand your situation. Kaisha's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. You investigated me. I did, he said without apology. And what I found was remarkable. Kaisha Washington, age 42. High school graduate with honors. 2 years of community college before you had to drop out to care for your sick mother. Worked steadily for 20 years, retail food service, factory work, cleaning services. Never missed a rent payment until the factory closed and your landlord decided to cash in on gentrification. No criminal record, not even a traffic ticket. References from former employers describe you as reliable, honest, and hardworking. Each word hit Keisha like a physical blow. Her life reduced to a series of facts in a file. Her struggles and failures laid bare for a stranger's examination. She wanted to run, to disappear back into the anonymity of the streets where no one cared about her employment history or her college transcripts. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because I want to offer you a job." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Agent Chun's eyebrows rose slightly, and Keisha felt her heart skip a beat. What kind of job? James Sterling pulled out a third document. "I'm expanding my company's security operations. After yesterday's incident, it's clear we need people who understand crisis management from a different perspective. People who know how to think on their feet, who can stay calm under pressure, and who have genuine compassion for others." He paused. "People like you." Keisha looked at the job description. Personal security specialist. Benefits package. Starting. Salary that was more than she'd ever made in a year, even when she was working 2 jobs. "I don't know anything about security work," she protested. "You protected my daughter for 12 hours during a dangerous storm with nothing but your own resources and determination. You kept her calm, kept her warm, kept her safe. That's not something you can teach in a classroom." James Sterling's voice grew more earnest. "Keisha, you have instincts that money can't buy and training can't create. You have integrity. And after yesterday, you have Emma's complete trust, which means you have mine." Agent Chun cleared her throat. "This is unusual, but not unprecedented. Sometimes civilian heroes are offered positions in security or law enforcement. The FBI has consulted with private security firms before." Keisha's mind raced. A real job, health insurance, a steady paycheck, the chance to move off the streets permanently, to have an address again, to be somebody instead of invisible. But also expectations she might not be able to meet, a world she didn't understand, the possibility of failing in front of people who would be watching her every move. "There's something else," James Sterling said, producing one final document. "I've taken the liberty of purchasing a small apartment building on the south side. Nothing fancy, but solid construction, good neighborhood, recently renovated. I'm offering you a 2-bedroom unit, rent-free for the first year, modest rent after that. Emma insisted that you should have a place where she can visit you. The generosity was overwhelming. It was too much, too fast, too far beyond anything Keisha had dared to hope for." She looked at the apartment lease, at the job offer, at the check that represented more money than she'd ever dreamed of having. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. James Sterling was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of emotion that hadn't been there before. "Because 8 months ago, I was working late in my office when I got a call that changed my life. Emma's mother, my wife Sarah, had been in a car accident. By the time I got to the hospital, she was gone." His voice caught slightly. "Emma is all I have left. She's everything that matters to me. And last night, when I thought I'd lost her too. He stopped, unable to continue. Agent Chun discreetly pushed a box of tissues across the desk. "You brought my daughter home," James Sterling said finally. "You kept her safe when I couldn't. You gave her comfort when she was terrified. You did for her what I would have done if I'd been there. How do you put a price on that? How do you say thank you for saving the only thing in the world that matters to you?" Keisha understood then that this wasn't charity or guilt or some wealthy man's attempt to buy his way out of an uncomfortable situation. This was a father's gratitude, pure and simple. A parent recognizing that his child was alive because a stranger had chosen compassion over convenience. "What if I'm not good at the job?" she asked. "Then we'll train you until you are. What if you don't like the apartment? Then we'll find you a different one. What if this is all too much too fast?" James Sterling smiled for the first time since entering the office. "Then we'll take it one day at a time. But Kaisha, I need you to understand something. This isn't me doing you a favor. This is me asking you to do me one. I want Emma to grow up knowing that there are still good people in the world. People who do the right thing, not because they have to, but because they choose to. I want her to know you. I want her to learn from you. And selfishly, I want to know that if something ever happens to me, there's someone in her life who will protect her the way you protected her last night." Kaisha looked at the documents spread across the desk. The check, the job offer, the lease agreement. A new life laid out in legal terminology and dollar amounts. But more than that, a chance to matter. A chance to be seen, to be valued, to use the strength she'd developed surviving on the streets to help others instead of just enduring. She picked up the pen Agent Chun offered her and signed her name at the bottom of each document. Her handwriting was careful, deliberate, the signature of someone who understood the weight of the commitment she was making. "When do I start?" she asked. James Sterling's smile widened. "How about tomorrow? Emma's been asking when she can show you her room and introduce you to her goldfish. I think she's planning to make you pancakes for the first time in months." Kaisha smiled back. The storm had taken her shopping cart, her sleeping bag, and the few possessions that had anchored her to the streets. But it had given her something infinitely more valuable, a future she'd never dared to imagine, and a little girl who would always believe that heroes came in many forms, including tired women with gentle hands and the courage to stop when others kept driving. 3 weeks later, Kaisha stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Financial Group's 32nd floor, watching Lake Michigan stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The building hummed with quiet efficiency around her phones ringing softly, printers whirring, the muted conversations of people who moved millions of dollars with careful keystrokes and calculated decisions. She wore a navy blue blazer over dark slacks, professional attire that still felt foreign against her skin, like a costume she hadn't quite learned to inhabit. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed. The exhaustion that had marked her features for months had been replaced by something steadier, though traces of wariness remained in her eyes. Her hair had been professionally styled at a salon Emma had insisted on visiting together, and her hands, once cracked and weathered from exposure, now bore the softness that came from regular meals, warm showers, and moisturizer that cost more than she used to spend on food in a week. "The view never gets old," said Marcus Rodriguez, approaching with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He was head of Sterling Financial Security Team, a former Chicago police detective with 23 years of experience and the kind of steady demeanor that made nervous clients feel safe. Over the past weeks, he'd become Kaisha's mentor, guiding her through the complex world of corporate security with patience that surprised them both. "It's something else," Kaisha agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Hard to believe I'm looking at the same lake I used to see from the shelter." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. "Mr. Sterling wants to see you in his office at 10. Something about the Henderson account." Kaisha checked her watch, a simple but elegant piece that James had given her on her first day, claiming it was standard equipment for security personnel. She'd learned that James Sterling had many ways of being generous without making it feel like charity. The watch, the tablet computer, the emergency communication device, even the gym membership that came with her benefits package, all presented as job necessities rather than gifts. "Any idea what the Henderson situation involves?" she asked. "Industrial espionage, possibly. Henderson Technologies has been developing some kind of revolutionary battery technology, and there have been several attempted break-ins at their facilities. They're looking for security consultation." Marcus paused, studying her expression. Kaisa, you know you don't have to take every assignment Sterling offers, right? You're still learning, and some of these cases are complex. It was a conversation they'd had variations of before. Marcus worried that James was advancing Kaisha too quickly, giving her responsibilities that typically required years of experience. But Kaisha had proven herself repeatedly over the past 3 weeks, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of threat assessment that couldn't be taught in training manuals. I know, she said simply. But I also know that sitting behind a desk isn't why he hired me. The truth was more complicated. James Sterling hadn't hired her to be a typical security specialist. He'd hired her because she understood vulnerability in ways that most security professionals never would. She could spot the signs of distress that others missed, recognize when someone was scared rather than angry, identify the difference between genuine threats and manufactured drama. Her years on the streets had taught her to read people and situations with an accuracy that impressed even veteran agents. They walked together toward the executive floor, passing through corridors lined with abstract art and subtle displays of the company's achievements. Employees nodded respectfully as they passed. Word had spread quickly about the woman who'd saved the boss's daughter, and Kaisha had discovered that heroism, even reluctant heroism, carried currency in the corporate world. James Sterling's office occupied the building's southwest corner, offering panoramic views of both the lake and the city's sprawling neighborhoods. The space was elegant but not ostentatious. Darkwood furniture, leather-bound books, family photos strategically placed to remind visitors that behind the business success was a man who valued relationships above profit margins. Emma sat cross-legged on a Persian rug in the corner, surrounded by coloring books and crayons, humming softly to herself as she worked on what appeared to be a detailed rendering of a castle. She looked up when Kaisha entered, her face lighting up with the uncomplicated joy that children reserve for their favorite people. Kaisha, look what I made for you. Emma scrambled to her feet and thrust a drawing toward her. The picture showed 2 stick figures standing under what might have been rain or stars. It was hard to tell. One figure was tall with dark skin and a big smile. The other was small with yellow hair. That's you saving me in the storm, Emma explained proudly. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Kaisha said, accepting the drawing with the solemnity it deserved. She'd learned that Emma's artwork often captured emotional truths that adult conversations missed. This particular drawing would join the collection. Growing on her apartment refrigerator, a gallery of their developing friendship rendered in crayon and marker. Emma, why don't you show Kaisha your new book while I finish this call? James suggested, gesturing toward his desk where a phone conference was apparently in progress on speaker. Emma eagerly pulled Kaisha toward a child-sized reading nook that had appeared in the office sometime during the previous week. James Sterling had a talent for anticipating his daughter's needs in ways that seemed effortless but probably required considerable thought and planning. The reading corner included a small bookshelf, comfortable cushions, and a lamp designed to cast warm, steady light. This one's about a princess who saves a dragon instead of the other way around, Emma explained, settling beside Kaisha with the book in her lap. Daddy says it's important to read stories where girls do the rescuing too. As Emma read aloud, stumbling occasionally over difficult words but pressing forward with determination, Kaisha found herself thinking about the strange turns her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, her biggest concern had been finding a dry place to sleep. Now she was sitting in a billionaire's office, listening to his daughter read stories about brave princesses, while preparing to consult on industrial espionage cases. Transformation should have felt overwhelming, but somehow it didn't. Perhaps because James and Emma Sterling had made it clear from the beginning that they valued her for who she was, not who they thought she should become. The job training focused on enhancing her existing skills rather than replacing them. The apartment came furnished but not decorated, leaving her free to make it her own. Even the salary, while generous, was structured as payment for services rendered rather than charity dispensed. James finished his conference call and joined them in the reading corner, settling into a chair that seemed designed for adult participation. In children's activities. How's the princess story coming along? She just convinced the dragon to help her build a library instead of hoarding treasure, Emma reported. I think that's much smarter than fighting. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones nobody expects, James agreed, glancing meaningfully at Keisha. It was the kind of comment he made frequently, observations that seemed casual but carried deeper implications about problem-solving, creative thinking, and the value of unconventional approaches. Speaking of unexpected solutions, he continued, Marcus mentioned you've been working on the Morrison case. The Morrison case involved a wealthy family whose teenage son had been receiving threatening messages through social media. The threats weren't specific enough to involve law enforcement, but they were persistent and escalating. Traditional security measures, bodyguards, car services, restricted access had only seemed to increase the boy's anxiety and resentment. I think the threats are coming from someone at his school, Keisha said, but not a student. Someone with administrative access to multiple social media accounts. Someone who knows his schedule well enough to reference specific classes and activities. James raised an eyebrow. What makes you think that? The timing of the messages. They come during school hours, but never during the same period twice. Like someone's sending them between other duties. And the language is too formal for a teenager. Whoever's writing these messages is older, educated, probably frustrated about something unrelated to the Morrison family specifically. Any theories about motive? Keisha hesitated. This was the part of her job that still felt uncertain, translating her instincts into the kind of concrete recommendations that justified her salary. I think it's about attention. Someone who feels invisible, overlooked, maybe passed over for recognition or promotion. They're targeting the Morrison boy because he represents everything they don't have: privilege, opportunity, a future that seems guaranteed. Emma looked up from her book. Like the dragon in the story, he was just lonely and didn't know how to make friends. Exactly like that, James said, smiling at his daughter before turning back to Keisha. So what do you recommend? I'd like to spend a day at the school. Not as a security consultant, but as someone evaluating their anti-bullying programs or reviewing their social media policies. Something that would let me observe the staff without making them defensive. Keisha paused, choosing her words carefully. People act differently when they think they're being watched for threats, versus when they think they're being evaluated for competence. Marcus, who had been listening quietly from across the room, nodded approvingly. That's good thinking. When do you want to set it up? Tomorrow, if possible. The longer this goes on, the more likely it is to escalate into something more serious. James made a note on his tablet. Consider it done. What about the Henderson consultation? Are you comfortable taking the lead on that? The Henderson Technologies case was significantly more complex than anything Keisha had handled before. Industrial espionage cases involved corporate competitors, international interests, and the kind of sophisticated threats that could destroy companies and ruin lives. But she'd spent the previous evening reviewing the case files, and something about the pattern of attempted break-ins didn't match traditional espionage profiles. I'd like to visit their facilities first, she said. Talk to the employees, understand their security protocols, get a feel for the company culture. Sometimes the biggest threats come from inside, and they're not always about stealing secrets. What do you think they are about? Keisha considered the question. Revenge, maybe. Or proving a point. The break-in attempts have been clumsy, almost like someone wants to get caught. That suggests someone with access who's trying to expose vulnerabilities rather than exploit them. Emma closed her book and looked up at the adults with the serious expression she wore when trying to understand grown-up conversations. Are you talking about bad people trying to hurt the company? We're talking about people who might be confused or angry, Kaisha explained gently. Sometimes when people feel hurt, they make choices that hurt other people. Our job is to figure out why they feel that way and help them find better choices. Like talking instead of fighting? Exactly like that. James Sterling watched this exchange with something approaching wonder. In 3 weeks, Kaisha had become more than an employee or even a friend. She'd become a translator between his world and Emma's, someone who could explain complex adult problems in terms a 7-year-old could understand without being condescending or dismissive. There's something else I wanted to discuss, James said as Emma returned to her book. Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up story. 3 weeks later, how has the rescue changed both your lives? That kind of thing. Kaisha's expression immediately grew wary. The initial media coverage had been intense but brief, a feel-good story about an unlikely hero that had dominated local news for exactly one news cycle before being replaced by political scandals and sports controversies. She'd hoped that would be the end of it. I'm not really comfortable with media attention, she said carefully. I know. But Emma's been asking about it. She wants people to know that you're her friend now, not just someone who helped her once. Emma looked up again, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Can we tell them about the pancakes you make? And how you taught me to braid friendship bracelets? And how do you know all the best stories about constellations? The simple request highlighted something Kaisha was still learning to navigate. Emma saw their relationship as a natural friendship between two people who enjoyed each other's company. She didn't understand the complex dynamics of class, race, and circumstance that made their friendship noteworthy to others. To Emma, Kaisha was simply someone who listened to her stories, helped with homework, and remembered to ask about her goldfish. We'll think about it, Kaisha said diplomatically. Right now I need to prepare for tomorrow's school visit. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Emma tugged on her sleeve. Kaisha, are you coming to dinner on Sunday? Daddy's making his famous spaghetti. Wouldn't miss it, Kaisha replied, and meant it. Sunday dinners at the Sterling house had become a tradition that anchored her week, providing structure and connection that her previous life had lacked. Walking back through the corporate corridors toward the elevator, Kaisha reflected on the strangeness of her current existence. She carried a briefcase now, attended strategy meetings, and had business cards with her name printed in elegant font. But underneath the professional exterior, she remained the same person who'd spotted a frightened child in a storm and refused to keep walking. The difference was that now she had resources to match her instincts, support to amplify her natural abilities, and most importantly, people who believed in her capacity to make a difference. The storm had taken away her old life, but it had given her something she'd never dared to hope for, the chance to build a new one, based on purpose rather than survival. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Kaisha checked her reflection. In the polished steel doors, the woman looking back at her was someone she was still getting to know, professional, confident, carrying herself with the quiet authority that came from being valued and trusted. But her eyes remained the same, alert, compassionate, ready to notice what others might miss. Tomorrow she would walk through a school hallway, observing teachers and administrators while searching for signs of the frustration and invisibility that could drive someone to make threats against a teenager. Next week, she would tour a technology company, looking for the human vulnerabilities that sophisticated security systems couldn't detect. These were problems that required more than technical expertise. They required understanding of how desperation and hope, fear and anger could manifest in unexpected ways. It was work that suited her perfectly, though she couldn't have imagined it 3 weeks ago when her biggest concern was staying dry in a storm. The rain had washed away her old life, but it had also cleared the path for something better. Something that felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like home. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning with a phone call that shattered the careful stability Kaisha had built over the past 2 months. She was reviewing security footage from Henderson Technologies when her phone buzzed with James Sterling's personal number, a line he used only for emergencies. Kaisha. His voice was tight with controlled panic. Someone took Emma. The words hit her like ice water. She was already moving toward the elevator before her conscious mind caught up with what he'd said. Where? When? What happened? Lincoln Elementary, about 20 minutes ago. A woman claiming to be Emma's aunt signed her out for a medical emergency. The school called to verify, but by then they were gone. Kaisha's mind raced through possibilities as the elevator descended. Emma didn't have an aunt. Sarah Sterling had been an only child, and James's sister lived in Seattle with 3 children of her own. This was either a case of mistaken identity, unlikely, given Emma's distinctive appearance and famous last name, or something far more sinister. Did anyone get a description of the woman? Mid-30s, blonde, professional appearance. She had identification that looked legitimate, knew enough details about Emma's medical history to convince the school nurse. James's voice cracked slightly. She knew about Emma's allergy to strawberries, Kaisha. That's not public information. The details sent chills down Kaisha's spine. Someone with inside knowledge had planned this carefully. This wasn't a random kidnapping or a spur of the moment. Crime. Someone had been watching the Sterling family, learning their routines, gathering information. I'm on my way to the school, she said, exiting into the building's parking garage. Have you called the FBI? Agent Chun is coordinating the response. But Kaisha. He paused, and she could hear the fear he was trying to suppress. I need you on this. You understand Emma in ways that other people don't. You know how she thinks, how she reacts when she's scared. Kaisha was already in her car, a modest sedan that James had insisted was necessary for her work. As she navigated Chicago traffic with grim efficiency, her mind shifted into the analytical mode that had served her well on the streets. Survival. Depended on reading situations quickly, identifying threats, finding escape routes. The skills that had kept her alive during her worst months were exactly what Emma needed now. Lincoln Elementary buzzed with barely controlled chaos when Kaisha arrived. FBI agents moved through the hallways with quiet intensity, interviewing teachers and staff while uniformed officers secured the building's perimeter. Parents clustered. In worried groups, their own children clutched protectively as they tried to understand how something like this could happen at their safe. Suburban School. Agent Chun approached Kaisha near the main entrance, her expression grim but professional. Ms. Washington, Mr. Sterling said you were coming. What do we know? The woman used the name Rebecca Sterling, claimed to be James's sister. She had a driver's license, a medical power of attorney document, and detailed knowledge of Emma's medical history and family situation. Agent Chun consulted her notes. The school secretary said she seemed genuinely distressed about the medical emergency, something about Emma's father being in an accident and needing surgery. Kaisha felt anger surge in her chest. Someone had manipulated a 7-year-old's love for her father to make her cooperate with her own kidnapping. Security cameras? Parking lot footage shows a dark blue SUV, but the license plate was obscured. We're checking traffic cameras along the likely routes, but whoever did this chose their timing carefully. The lunch hour rush means hundreds of similar vehicles on the roads. They walked through the school toward Emma's classroom, where Kaisha hoped to find clues that the FBI might have missed. She'd learned that her perspective often revealed details that trained investigators overlooked, not because they weren't competent, but because their training focused on criminal behavior rather than human psychology. Emma's second grade classroom felt too quiet without the usual energy of 23 7-year-olds. Colorful artwork covered the walls and reading corners. Filled with picture books suggested a space designed to nurture young minds. But now it felt like a crime scene. the innocence tainted by the knowledge that someone had used a child's trust as a weapon. Mrs. Patterson, Emma's teacher, sat at her desk with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands. She was a woman in her 50s with the patient demeanor that elementary teachers developed over decades of managing classroom chaos. But today, her professional composure had cracked under the weight of guilt and fear. "I should have questioned it more," she said when Keisha introduced herself. But the woman seemed so worried, and she knew so much about Emma. She mentioned the goldfish and Emma's favorite book about dragons. Those details confirmed Keisha's suspicion that this was an inside job. Information about Emma's pets and reading preferences wasn't something a stranger could acquire through public records or casual observation. Someone with regular access to the Sterling family had provided intelligence for this operation. "Mrs. Patterson, think carefully about the past few weeks. Has anyone asked unusual questions about Emma? New volunteers, substitute teachers, maintenance workers, anyone who seemed particularly interested in her routine?" The teacher wiped her eyes and considered the question. There was a new parent volunteer last month. She helped with the reading program and asked a lot of questions about which children were struggling and which ones excelled. She seemed very interested in Emma specifically, mentioned how articulate she was for her age. "Do you remember her name? Catherine something. Catherine Wells, I think. She said her daughter was starting at Lincoln next year, and she wanted to get involved early." Mrs. Patterson's face went pale. "Oh my God. She was gathering information, wasn't she?" Agent Chun was already on her phone, running the name through databases while Keisha continued her examination of the classroom. She studied Emma's desk. Her artwork on the walls, the small personal items that revealed a child's personality. Emma had drawn another picture recently, this one showing 3 figures standing together in front of a tall building. One figure was small with yellow hair, one was tall with dark skin, and one was even taller with brown hair and a tie. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, "My family." The drawing reinforced what Keisha already knew Emma felt. Secure, loved, protected. She trusted the adults in her life to keep her safe. That trust had been weaponized against her, used to make her cooperate with someone who meant her harm. Keisha's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "If you want to see Emma again, come to Millennium Park alone. East side of Crown Fountain. 1 hour, no police, no FBI, no backup, just you." She stared at the message, her heart pounding. Someone was specifically targeting her, using Emma as bait to draw her into a trap. But why? What could anyone gain by hurting her? Agent Chun noticed her expression. "What is it?" Keisha showed her the message, watching as the agent's face hardened with professional concern. "This changes everything. They're not just after Emma, they want you too." "Any idea?" "Why?" "Several possibilities. You're the most visible symbol of the Sterling family's transformation, the living proof that James Sterling values character over class. Someone might see you as a threat to their plans, or they might want to use you as leverage against Sterling." Financial. The second theory made more sense. James Sterling's company managed billions of dollars in investments, handled mergers and acquisitions that could make or break entire industries. There were countless people who might benefit from having leverage over him, and Emma represented the ultimate pressure point. But targeting Keisha specifically suggested something more personal. Someone who resented her rise from homelessness to prominence, who saw her success as undeserved or threatening to their own position. "I'm going to the park," Keisha said quietly. "Absolutely not. We can't risk both of you. They specifically asked for me. If I don't show, they might hurt Emma." Keisha met Agent Chun's eyes steadily. "I spent 8 months on the streets learning to spot dangerous situations and find ways out of them. I can handle this." Agent Chun studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Not alone. We'll have teams positioned around the park, invisible surveillance, emergency response, ready to move. But you'll wear a wire, and if anything goes wrong, you follow our extraction protocols." 30 minutes later, Kaisha walked through Millennium Park with a microtransmitter hidden in her jacket and the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. The park buzzed with typical afternoon activity: tourists photographing Cloud Gate, children playing in Crown Fountain, office workers eating lunch on benches. Scattered throughout the green space dot, she spotted the woman before reaching the designated meeting point. Mid-30s, blonde, professional appearance, just as the school staff had described. But Kaisha recognized something else: the restless energy of someone operating under extreme stress, the hypervigilance that came from fear and desperation. "Ms. Washington." The woman stepped out from behind a tree, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. "Thank you for coming. Where's Emma?" "She's safe, for now." The woman glanced around nervously. "But that depends on your cooperation." Kaisha studied her carefully, noting details that might prove important. Expensive clothing but slightly wrinkled, suggesting she'd been wearing the same outfit for hours. Manicured nails but chipped polish, indicating someone who usually maintained appearances but was currently under pressure. Most importantly, her eyes held the desperation of someone who felt trapped rather than the cold calculation of a professional criminal. "What do you want?" "I want James Sterling to understand what it feels like to lose everything." The woman's voice carried a bitterness that spoke of personal grievance rather than random malice. "I want him to know that his money and power can't protect the people he cares about. This is about Sterling Financial. This is about justice." The woman's composure cracked slightly. "My husband worked for Sterling Financial for 15 years. 15 years of loyalty, of 60-hour weeks, of missing our daughter's school plays and soccer games because the company always came first. And when the Anderson merger fell through, they needed someone to blame. They destroyed his reputation, blacklisted him from the industry, left us with nothing." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about money or corporate espionage. This was about revenge, about a family destroyed by business decisions and a woman who'd watched her life crumble while the Sterling family continued to prosper. "So you decided to hurt a 7-year-old girl." "I decided to make James Sterling understand loss the way we understand it." The woman's voice broke. "Do you know what it's like to watch your husband drink himself to sleep every night because he can't find work? To explain to your own daughter why you can't afford her dance lessons anymore while James Sterling's daughter gets private tutors and art classes?" Kaisha felt a stab of sympathy for the woman's pain, but her priority remained clear. "Where is Emma?" "Somewhere safe. But she won't stay that way unless Sterling Financial publicly acknowledges what they did to my family and provides adequate compensation for the damage they caused." "And if they don't?" The woman's expression hardened. "Then James Sterling will learn that money can't buy back what really matters." Kaisha recognized the look in the woman's eyes, the same desperate determination she'd seen in her own reflection during the worst months on the streets. This was someone who felt she had nothing left to lose, which made her extremely dangerous. "What's your name?" Kaisha asked gently. "Catherine Wells. My husband is Michael Wells, and your boss destroyed his life." "Catherine, I understand you're hurt and angry, but Emma is innocent. She doesn't deserve to pay for decisions adults made. And my daughter doesn't deserve to have her father destroyed by corporate greed." Catherine's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby park visitors. "But innocence doesn't matter when powerful people want something, does it?" Agent Chun's voice crackled softly in Kaisha's earpiece. "Teams are in position. Keep her." Talking, Kaisha took a careful step closer to Catherine, her hands visible and non-threatening. "You're right. Sometimes innocent people get hurt by circumstances beyond their control. I know what that feels like. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, You got rescued from poverty by a billionaire who felt guilty about his privilege. Not exactly the same thing as watching your family destroyed by corporate politics. The accusation stung because it contained elements of truth. Kaisha's transformation had been dramatic and largely unearned in traditional terms. But she'd also learned that survivor's guilt was less important than survivor's responsibility. "You're right that I got lucky," she admitted. "But Emma didn't choose her father's wealth any more than your daughter chose your husband's circumstances. Hurting her won't fix what happened to your family." Catherine's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted from anger to panic. No, no, no. This wasn't supposed to happen. What is it? Emma's gone. The person? Watching her says she's not where we left her. Catherine's carefully constructed plan was unraveling, and fear replaced calculation in her voice. She was supposed to stay put. 7-year-olds don't just disappear. But Kaisha knew that Emma Sterling was no ordinary 7-year-old. She was a child who'd survived being lost in a storm, who'd learned to trust her instincts and look for help when adults failed her. If she'd found an opportunity to escape, she would have taken it. "Catherine, we need to work together to find her." A scared child alone in the city is in real danger. For the first time since the conversation began, Catherine Wells looked less like a vengeful kidnapper and more like a terrified mother who'd made a terrible mistake. The realization that her plan had put an innocent child at genuine risk seemed to break through her anger and desperation. "I never meant for her to get hurt," she whispered. "I just wanted Sterling to understand." "I know," Kaisha said, pulling out her phone. "But right now, we need to focus on bringing Emma home safely. After that, we can figure out how to address what happened to your family." As she speed-dialed Agent Chun, Kaisha realized that the storm that had brought her and Emma together was far from over. They'd weathered the first tempest and found each other. But now they faced a different kind of danger, one born of human desperation rather than natural forces. And once again, keeping Emma safe would require all the strength, wisdom, and courage Kaisha had learned during her darkest hours on the streets. Emma Sterling sat quietly in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner on West Madison Street, her small hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate that the waitress had brought without being asked. The elderly woman behind the counter had taken one look at the frightened child in torn clothing and muddy shoes and immediately switched into protective mode, asking no questions but keeping watchful eyes on the front door. Emma had learned something important during her months of friendship with Kaisha. When you were scared and alone, you looked for people who understood what it meant to be vulnerable. The diner was full of those people. Construction workers grabbing quick meals between jobs, elderly folks nursing coffee to make it last, teenagers who'd clearly spent the night somewhere other than home. These were Kaisha's people, and Emma instinctively knew they would protect her the way Kaisha had protected her during the storm. "You okay, sweetheart?" asked the waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and worn hands. Her name tag read Dorothy, and she moved with the efficient grace of someone who'd been taking care of other people for decades. "I'm waiting for someone," Emma said politely. "My friend Kaisha. She know to look for me here." Dorothy nodded, as if 7-year-olds regularly showed up at her diner asking for specific people. "Well, you just sit tight then. And if you get hungry, you let me know. We've got good pie today." 3 miles away, Kaisha moved through the streets with Catherine Wells beside her, both women united by shared fear for Emma's safety. Agent Chun coordinated the search from a mobile command center, deploying teams to canvass the area where Emma had last been seen. But Kaisha knew that conventional search methods might not be enough. "Think like Emma," she murmured to herself, trying to channel the child's perspective. "She's smart, she's been taught about stranger danger, but she also knows how to find help when she needs it." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked her earlier. Hostility replaced by genuine concern. "Emma spent a night with me when I was living on the streets. She learned that safety doesn't always come from the people you'd expect. Kaisha pulled out her phone and called Dorothy at Murphy's Diner, a number she knew by heart from her own difficult months. Murphy's Diner, this is Dorothy. Dorothy, it's Kaisha. I'm looking for a little girl, about 7 years old, blonde hair. She's right here, honey. Been waiting for you for about an hour. Drank 2 hot chocolates and told me all about her goldfish. Relief flooded through Kaisha so powerfully that she had to lean against a nearby lamppost for support. Is she okay? She's fine, a little shaken up, but fine. Smart kid, she said some lady tried to trick her, but she remembered what you taught her about recognizing safe people. Within 20 minutes, Kaisha, Catherine, and a discreet FBI escort arrived at Murphy's Diner. Emma looked up from her coloring book as they entered, her face lighting up with joy and relief. Kaisha, I knew you'd find me. She slid out of the booth and ran to embrace her, small arms wrapping tightly around Kaisha's waist. I remembered what you said about looking for helpers, and Dorothy gave me hot chocolate and didn't ask scary questions. Kaisha knelt down to Emma's level, checking her over for injuries while trying to control her own emotional response. You did exactly right, sweetheart. I'm so proud of how brave you were. Emma looked over at Catherine, who stood awkwardly near. The diner's entrance, her face a mixture of shame and relief. Are you the lady who was trying to help me get to my gaddy? The other lady said there was an emergency, but then she got really upset and started crying. Catherine's composure finally cracked completely. She sank into a nearby chair and buried her face in her hands. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just ... I was so angry and I thought ... Agent Chun stepped forward, ready to take Catherine into custody, but Kaisha held up a hand. She understood something that the FBI agent might miss. Catherine Wells wasn't a career criminal or a dangerous sociopath. She was a desperate mother who'd made terrible choices because she couldn't find any other way to be heard. Emma, Kaisha said gently, why don't you help Dorothy pick out some pie for your daddy? I bet he's going to want something sweet when he gets here. Emma nodded eagerly and skipped toward the counter, chattering to Dorothy about her father's favorite flavors. With the child safely distracted, Kaisha turned her attention to Catherine. Tell me about your daughter, she said, sitting across from the distraught woman. Catherine looked up, surprised by the question. She's 9. Her name is Sarah. She's everything to me. And she's watching her mother make choices that will take you away from her for a very long time. The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. In her desperation to seek justice for her family, she'd lost sight of the most important consideration. What? Her actions would cost the daughter she was trying to protect. I can't let them destroy my family and just walk away, Catherine said, but the conviction had drained from her voice. Then don't let them walk away, Kaisha replied. But there are better ways to fight than kidnapping children. Ways that don't make you the villain in your own daughter's story. James Sterling arrived at the diner 15 minutes later, moving with barely controlled urgency. His expensive suit looked out of place among the working-class clientele, but nobody seemed to care. Emma launched herself into his arms with the same joy she'd shown when seeing Kaisha, and for several minutes he simply held her, whispering reassurances and checking to make sure she was really safe. Daddy, this is Dorothy, Emma said, introducing the waitress with the solemnity of a diplomat. She takes care of people like Kaisha used to take care of me. James Sterling shook Dorothy's hand with genuine gratitude. Thank you for watching over her. That's what we do here, Dorothy replied simply. Look after each other. The next hour passed in a blur of official procedures. Catherine Wells was arrested but treated with dignity, her cooperation in Emma's safe recovery earning consideration from the prosecutors. Agent Chun handled the paperwork while Kaisha and James focused on helping Emma process what had happened without traumatizing her further. But the story didn't end with arrests and legal proceedings. 2 weeks later, James Sterling announced, The establishment of the Sterling Family Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping families devastated by corporate downsizing and industry changes. The foundation's first initiative provided job training, career counseling, and financial assistance to former Sterling Financial employees who'd been affected by company restructuring. Catherine Wells, after serving 6 months in minimum security prison, became one of the foundation's first employees, using her experience to help other families navigate the support services available to them. Her husband Michael eventually found new employment through the foundation's networking programs, and their daughter Sarah got the dance lessons she'd been missing. "It's not about charity," James explained to a room full of reporters at the foundation's launch event. "It's about responsibility. When our business decisions affect people's lives, we have an obligation to help them rebuild." Keisha stood beside him at the podium, no longer uncomfortable with media attention. She'd learned that visibility came with responsibility, the chance to show that transformation was possible, that people could rise above their circumstances without forgetting where they came from. "The night I found Emma in that storm," she said to the assembled crowd, "I thought I was just helping one scared child get through a difficult night. I didn't know that helping her would give me the chance to help so many others." Emma sat in the front row, wearing a yellow dress that reminded everyone of the night that had started it all. She held a drawing she'd made specifically for the occasion, dozens of stick figures holding hands in a circle, with the words "helpers" and "friends" written in careful 7-year-old handwriting across the top dot. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed and the cameras were packed away, the three of them sat together in James's office. Emma worked on homework while Keisha and James reviewed applications for the foundation's latest programs. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked. Quietly, "Everything that's happened since that night?" Keisha considered the question seriously. Her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. The apartment, the job, the recognition, the responsibility. But more than that, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was missing. A sense of purpose that went beyond survival. "No," she said finally. "I spent too many years feeling invisible, like nothing I did mattered. Now I know that small choices can have big consequences. That stopping for one scared child can change multiple lives." Emma looked up from her homework. "Keisha, will you read me a story tonight? The one about the princess who saves the dragon?" "Of course, sweetheart." Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual energy. Somewhere in the city, other people were facing storms, both literal and metaphorical, that would test their courage and compassion. But in a billionaire's office on the 32nd floor of a gleaming tower, a former homeless woman, a powerful CEO, and a 7-year-old girl continued the work of proving that heroes came in many forms, and that the most important rescues often began with the simple decision to stop when others kept walking. The storm that had brought them together was long over. But its legacy lived on in every family helped by the foundation, every child protected by someone who chose to see rather than ignore, every person who discovered that their worst moment could become the beginning of their best chapter. Sometimes, the weather changes everything. Sometimes it just clears the way for what was always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.